have a question. If you could go anywhere you wanted and see anything that you wanted to see, where would you want to go? And what would you want to see, and where would you want to go? Sometimes people talk about places like Korea or Japan or Europe, and those places sound like a lot of fun. Never tried those places, but maybe I will one day. And I think it'd be good to experience a different culture, get some food, spend some time with people that I like. But today I want to talk more about the seeing part. What do you want to see? And for me, that would be a bit of a harder question because I can kind of see everything I want already on the internet, on YouTube. So I'm just like not that interested in seeing stuff because I got YouTube. That's kind of good enough for me. But imagine if you had a superpower, the ability to see literally anything you wanted, even the things that nobody's ever taken pictures of or taken videos of. Well, then you could use that power to do some pretty incredible things. For example, you could use that power to look into some of the most closely guarded secrets in the world. One of the greatest secrets of our time is the recipe for Coca-Cola. I hear there's only a few people in the world that know this recipe, and they keep the recipe in a safe somewhere in the States. And they keep it highly protected because if anybody got their hands on this recipe, they would actually be able to copy this recipe totally legally. And so you can imagine all the other competitors copying this recipe, and they all have their own thing that is exactly like Coke, and they'd be able to sell it and stuff like that, so Coke would lose all their competitive advantage. So this would be a really big deal. If you can imagine using your superpower to get that recipe and sell it to the highest bidder, you can imagine how much money you can get from that. Probably shouldn't do that because you're a Christian, like let's be good neighbors here. But if I was not a Christian, would be very interested. But actually, I think there's something even better, something even greater to see. And that brings me to my main topic today, which is the topic of seeing God. Jesus said one time, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Now, to be fair, this is a figure of speech because God is by nature invisible, and so we cannot see an invisible thing with our eyes. But the point is that we can experience God. We can know God as if we were seeing Him. We can live with Him every day and have this friendship and partnership with Him. And if we could have this kind of thing, it would be the absolute greatest thing in the world. And so my big question today is, how can we experience the greatness of God? I want to show you today the answer that I found in the Bible. Number one, we need to follow God's instructions. Number two, we need to treasure God's presence. Follow His instructions and treasure His presence. And my task today will be to show you this from our Bible passage. So now let's turn to the book of Leviticus, chapter 9, verses 1 to 4. I'll read it to you. On the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a bull calf for your sin offering and a ram for your burnt offering, both without defect, and present them before the Lord. Then say to the Israelites, take a male goat for a sin offering and a calf and a lamb, both a year old and without defect, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for a fellowship offering to sacrifice before the Lord, together with a grain offering mixed with olive oil. For today the Lord will appear to you." Based on this passage, my first point is that we need to follow God's instructions. And so almost everything in the passage that we read is about instructions for a burnt offering, a sin offering, a grain offering, a fellowship offering, and different things that these Israelites had to do in selecting these animals. And it sounds kind of boring. And you haven't seen the most of it, actually, because here we're starting at chapter 9 in our series, because the first 8 chapters of the book of Leviticus are made of this stuff. It's so boring. It's just chapter after chapter of details and specifications and instructions for how to select an animal, what to do with the animal, how to select grain and how to process the grain, what to do with the blood, how to burn things, how to dispose of animal remains. This is the kind of stuff that puts people to sleep. And yet, it was written this way on purpose. See, this writer, it's not like a writer that doesn't know how to handle a pen or something like that. No, this is a genius writer. This is the same writer who gave us the stories of Adam and Eve and Abraham and Moses and all the great stories in the beginning of the Bible. This person knows how to write better than anybody I know. This is a genius, one of the greatest literary geniuses in history. And this person decided to write 8 chapters of the most boring stuff you will ever read. Because sometimes the details are that important. Sometimes you have to get the details right and all the instructions right. And sometimes we only appreciate the effect of a detail when we miss it and we have to pay for the consequences. A couple years ago, I was driving in a snowstorm. So it was minus 30 degrees outside. Snow was falling in big, heavy clumps. And I was on Highway 2, just slowly trekking my way. Traffic was just really slow, and it seemed to get slower and slower. I was in the middle lane, which is usually the safe lane in these situations. And I looked around, and the lane to my left, to the fast lane, was almost empty. So I was getting impatient, so I switched lanes. I started passing everybody. It was great. And then about a minute later, I discovered why everybody was so slow. Because they were crossing a bridge. And that bridge was covered with black ice. I'd never seen black ice like that, quite like that before. But it was really severe, this black ice. And suddenly my car lost all of its traction. I was spinning out of control. I spun into the next lane and crashed into a trailer. And the impact of the crash spun me the other way, did a 180 and stopped by the side of the road. Almost like, a drifting thing, almost like I did it on purpose or something like that. But no, I'm not that good. In hindsight, though, this entire incident was preventable. See, on that bridge, there's actually a sign that it's slippery when it's cold out. And for whatever reason that day, I missed that sign. I see it all the time nowadays, but on the one day that I missed it, that's when I had my accident. That's what happens sometimes with details. Sometimes they're really important. And so as we look into these details in the book of Leviticus, all these chapters full of details, we find instruction after instruction of the things that they have to do. There's a lot of things that they had to do. It was time-consuming and expensive and troublesome. It was bloody. It's kind of gross. But they had to do it. And there's actually a reason for why it had to be this hard. It's because it showed us the cost of a relationship with God. And in fact, it was a relationship, a cost that we actually could not pay by ourselves. And so, towards the end of the Bible, we see that all these sacrifices were actually pointing to Jesus, who was the offering that we needed but could not give to God. And so this is why we do not sacrifice animals anymore, because all these animals were pointing to Jesus. And now that we have the real thing and all these things were just pointing to him, we don't sacrifice animals anymore, which is great. But we still have an offering to give. A couple weeks ago, we were studying Romans chapter 12, and it talks about offering our body as a living sacrifice. In view of God's mercy, we offer our body as a living sacrifice. So remembering what Jesus did, this is what we do. We no longer die for our faith. Most of us are lucky enough to escape that, but we have to live for our faith, which means following Jesus' instructions. And as we seek to follow these instructions, we find that there's a lot of instructions. The Bible is a really big, thick book with a lot of stuff in it and a lot of stuff to follow. And if we're not careful, we will follow these instructions the wrong way. And it'll become oppressive. and really burdensome. Years ago, there was a boyfriend and a girlfriend who lived in Eastern Europe. And they had a rocky relationship. They were on again, off again, always arguing with each other. And so they decided, as a last-ditch effort, they would try something really extreme. So on Valentine's Day of 2021, they handcuffed themselves to each other, and they decided they would spend every second of every day with each other until they got their relationship right. And you can imagine this was a really big hassle because they had to get dressed at the same time, and the handcuffs. You can't actually get a shirt off properly if you have handcuffs on. They had to go to the washroom together. They had to go to work together. The girlfriend, she was a beautician, which meant that she did beauty treatments on women. And she actually had to quit her job because all of her clients, they were not okay with her being chained to another person while she was doing their eyelashes. So it was really a lot of trouble. And they kept this up for 123 days. And at the end of that 123 days, they cut the chains off and they decided that they were not meant for each other. They're separate ways. That was it. And I think a normal reaction to that story would be, what took them so long? How could they not have seen this coming? That this was a bad idea? But actually, this is what a lot of people's relationship with God is like. Growing up, this was my relationship with God. For some reason, God gave me the ability to keep a lot of Bible in my head, and so it just became a lot of rules growing up, hundreds of rules that governed my every action for every day, and I was always being told in the Bible to do things I didn't feel like doing and to go places I didn't want to go. It felt so unnatural, so uncomfortable, and it felt like I was being handcuffed to God and His Word, so I wasn't able to do what I wanted. It was really hard for myself and for everybody around me. And I was a bit of an extreme case, but actually this kind of relationship with God is somewhat common, where people have a lot of rules and they just follow the rules and they measure their relationship with God by the rules that they keep, and they judge other people by the rules that they break. It's kind of unpleasant, but it's normal enough. Reminded of an episode of The Simpsons where one of the characters says, "I was at Bible camp. I was learning how to be more judgmental," which is it's funny, but at the same time it hurts a little bit because it hits a little bit too close to home. And yet, I think we can all feel in our hearts it's not meant to be like that. I think the Bible confirms that. Jesus said in John chapter 10, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Later on, we find that there's a law. James talks about a perfect law that gives freedom. So God's laws, this whole pile of laws that He's given to us, is meant to lead us into fullness of life and to freedom. So how does that work? How does God tell you what to do and keep for everything in your life and still make you free? Well, I found that it really, really helps to understand the big picture of what's going on. Because actually there's a lot of themes and patterns in the Bible. And as we uncover these themes and live by these patterns, the whole body of laws actually becomes very beautiful. The biggest theme in the Bible is faith. Romans 1:17 says, "For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith." So our story is one of faith. Everything has to do with faith from first to last, and this faith expresses itself in love. Galatians 5 tells us the only thing that matters is faith expressing itself through love. So you can imagine that everything in the Bible being like a big tree, where the big trunk of the tree is like faith. Everything goes through faith, and this faith splits off into two main branches, which are love, the two great commandments of love. But of course, it'd be a really sad tree if all you had was a big trunk and two big branches. And so it keeps on splitting. And this love works itself out in obedience, in the keeping of his commandments. 1 John 5:3 says, in fact, this is love for God, to keep his commands, and his commands are not burdensome. And if we want to know what God's commandments are like, we look at the 10 Commandments, which are a summary of all the commandments that he has given us. And we find that this love, this bright white light of love, now becomes dispersed into its individual colors as we find out how to love God and love people with our time and our family life and our love life and our possessions and our words and our hopes and our dreams and our imaginations. So this is how all of the Bible is arranged, and the commandments is arranged with faith flowing into love, flowing into obedience. And of course, no tree is complete without the smallest branches and the leaves. And so we add to this framework with things like knowledge and wisdom and specialization and partnership. All of this becomes an act of faith, a pursuit of the joy that God has set before us, because that's what faith means. Everything becomes an expression of the greatest pursuit of joy that we could possibly make. And this is why the Bible is leading us into freedom, because when we understand it, we will say, why would we want to do anything else? This is the wisdom of God for us. This is God leading us into freedom. Freedom is leading us into the presence of God and into relationship with God, which leads to my second point. We need to treasure God's presence. Let's go back to verses 3 and 4. Moses said, Then say to the Israelites, take a male goat for a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both a year old and without defect, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for a fellowship offering, to sacrifice before the Lord, together with a grain offering mixed with olive oil. For today the Lord will appear to you. For today the Lord will appear to you. This is the reason. This is the reason why we make this sacrifice and we follow the instructions. For the Lord will appear to us. And God kept his promise at the end of the chapter. I'll read to you from Leviticus 9:22-24. Then Aaron lifted his hands towards the people and blessed them, and having sacrificed the sin offering and the burnt offering and the fellowship offering, he stepped down. Moses and Aaron then went into the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions in the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted for joy and fell face down. When I was younger, I studied in engineering school, and I took a chemistry class. And my chemistry professor liked to light things on fire during his classes to make things more interesting. And one day he brought this big white glob of stuff. It looked like a big woolly ball. And he explained that this ball, I think it was cotton, had been soaked with really flammable compound. And he took a moment to explain the exact chemical that it was being soaked in and why we should expect a lot of heat to come out of this chemical. Then after he was done talking, he got this big 10-foot pole. This 10-foot pole, and he lit one end, and he held the far end, so like a big giant matchstick, and he touched that white mound of material, and there was a loud whoosh sound and a huge fireball, and even towards the back of the room, we could feel the intense heat coming on our faces. And everybody clapped and cheered because it was awesome. I actually thought about doing that today, but I thought I'd get into trouble. But yeah, it was awesome. But nobody in the class fell face down and worshiped. In our Bible passage, they shouted for joy and they fell face down and worshiped. And I think they did that because they understood what this fire meant. It wasn't just some firework, as awesome as it might have looked like, but it was a symbol, a sign that God had accepted their offering, that they were welcomed back into the presence of God, that their sins had been forgiven, this broken relationship had been mended, and now they were living under the blessing of God. And all of his promises were going to come true, that someday they were going to escape this desert that they were stuck in. Someday their children would go on to inherit the promised land and have a home for themselves, and if they cared for it, all the nations on earth would be blessed through them. That was the meaning of the sacrifice. And the wonderful thing is that this story is meant to repeat itself in every one of our lives. Romans 15:4 tells us everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. It's incredible to think that everything was meant to repeat itself almost in our lives, to teach us. We were meant to experience the presence of God like that. We were meant to follow love and obedience into the presence of God. I want to read to you from John 14:23. Jesus replied, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home in them." So for anyone who loves God and obeys him, we will have the presence of God. And that's a really good thing, because the Christian life is actually really hard. The Bible tells us anybody who wants to live a godly life will be persecuted. But he promises to be with us to the end. He promises to give us what we need and to listen to our prayers and to give us power and to redeem all of our trouble. And in the end, in the far future, he promises to give us everything. Literally everything that there is to give. And that is the story of everyone who enters the presence of God. I'll conclude by summarizing everything I've said, and then I'll pray for us. So, our big question today was, how can we experience the greatness of God? Our Bible passage tells us that first we need to follow God's instructions. And that's a tall task because God has given us a lot of instructions. And so we have to remember how they're organized. We have to remember to follow the pattern of faith and love and obedience into freedom. And you know you're doing things right when it's leading you to freedom and to fullness of life. God's instructions are leading you into his presence. Love and obedience are leading you straight to him. And we have to understand that all this obedience and all this work is worth all the trouble. Because if we just have the presence of God, he will take us through all the hard times of life. And in the end, he will literally give us everything. Let's pray to close. God, your words are good. Pray that you would make your words come alive in our lives. What you've done before, please do it again. For your glory and for our joy. Amen.